All right, welcome to the Parenting Teen Summit Hope Edition. I'm Matt with Axis. This is
And I'm Michaela.
And we are here with Stephen. Stephen, you're going to have to say your last name for me here real quick.
Arterburn.
Arterburn. Okay, that's what I thought. Wanted to be sure. But Stephen Arterburn he's got more than 40 books under his belt. He's a speaker. He's a writer. He is a counselor for many years as well. So we're drawn from his years of expertise. And you might know him from the Everyman series, Every Man's Battle. And he's just going to share some great expertise today with us on the topics of depression and anxiety. So, Stephen, through your years of counseling and experience with all of that, really, what have you seen that gives you hope for the next generation, the ones that they're kind of rising right now?
Yeah. Well, there are always what you would call an outlier. There are always these unpredictable situations where biology, environment, all of these different things come together, and it produces a child that's really lost or in big trouble. And, it's hard to pinpoint what is the actual source and all of that. But for the most part, when parents decide that they're going to do the right thing for their kids, and they're going to provide for them some of the basic fundamental needs, which are very traditional and yet have to be delivered in a contemporary way. When parents decide to do that, there is a tremendously high percentage chance that the parents and the kids are going to stay connected. They're going to love each other into their adult years, and it's going to produce a relationship that a lot of people think is impossible because they don't have some of the fundamental foundational values on it. Now, I have 5 kids. My oldest is 26. She's in graduate school. She's an independent millennial, which is kind of a rare thing sometimes, but she's out there and she's making a difference. She's self-supporting, pays for her own life, and pays for her own school. And she's going to be an occupational therapist when she gets out of graduate school. And we have stayed so close. We'll spend the night together about every 3 or 4 weeks. I'll be out there visiting with her in California. I'm in Indiana. And that's because no matter what, our bond was the very most important thing. And there were some deficits in her life. There were some things. Her mother and her weren't, all of that close during those very important developmental years. And so I brought alongside her 6 different women, and I invited them into my daughter's life. And I asked them to spend time with her, put into her, and she's just such a great person that they were happy to do that. And on her 18th birthday, there was a dinner. I didn't go. It was just for the women in her life. And those 6 women, I got it videotaped. They went around the room and they said what they admired about her the most and what their best memory of her was on her 18th birthday. It was like a rite of passage dinner. But it was something that I did on purpose. It was something I wanted to have happen for her. I wanted her to have the strength and the stability that every female needs from other women. And I didn't feel like it was just going to come naturally. So there's great hope when you do stuff on purpose. Now, I also have a 19-year-old, an 18-year-old boy, an 11-year-old boy, and an 8-year-old little girl. You could say that I've had my own grandchildren in addition to my own kids. So at every level, I'm a different kind of parent. But I just can tell people that if you do this on purpose, you'll provide some security for your kids that will prevent them from being scared to death at life. And you'll also provide them a path and a process that will prevent them from getting sunken down into deep depression.
Yeah, and that's an amazing way to prepare them to fight that when it comes.
Yeah.
So just educate me here a little bit. If we're going to have a discussion about anxiety and depression, can we lump those into the same sort of category, or does it need more nuance beyond just those terms?
Well, I think the reason they do get lumped, two different reasons. One, they feel like they're the extremes of each other.
Hmm.
Scared to death, I'm hyper, I'm anxious, or I'm deeply depressed, immobile, hopeless. But they do go hand in hand. And a lot of folks that struggle with anxiety, they feel like that they're incompetent and they're not capable of thriving in life or surviving. And so they sink into depression. So I think when you're treating one, or you're trying to prevent one, or you're dealing with one, you're most likely trying to prevent, or dealing with the other also. So it's good to talk about both rather than just anxiety on its own, or depression on its own.
You fleshed out a little bit some of what the causes might be. Can we dive into that further? What are some of the causes to anxiety and depression? And also, how would that manifest itself to where a parent should be looking for this sign or that sign? What are some really visible or obvious signs that a parent might want to be looking for?
Yeah, well, I'll give you some C words, and the first one would be, you could say, values confusion would be a really crummy thing for a child to have, where they're not solidly secure that mom and dad know what the truth is, know what reality is, and have good values that I can rely on. We all know the stories of parents who want to be best friends with their kids.
Mm.
They don't really stand for anything. All they want is connection and closeness, and they don't have a structure. They don't have a system or a code of values. And they become friends with their kids, and then the kids are lost, and there's no solid foundation. So I think it's really important that a parent be very secure in their values and what is right and what is wrong. Like, it's real easy for me to say that we're going to abide by societal values when it comes to alcohol and drug consumption. You're not going to consume alcohol until it's legal for you to make that choice for yourself. And it's never legal for you to consume drugs. So that's just going to be the system. Now, what I said to Madeline when she was going into high school, and I, use a lot of exaggeration and stuff. So this wasn't literal, but she understood what I was saying. I said, look, I would like to give you major cash prizes and bonuses and benefits to life if you'll agree to a few things. I said, there'll be a car for you to go to college in and keep for the rest of your life. There'll be clothes, there'll be the finances, and the benefits will be off the chart. You'll ask me for stuff, and I'll say, yes, it'll be my privilege to do this. But you have to agree to something. You can't have sex with guys, and you can't drink, and you can't smoke pot, you can't take LSD, and you can't do any other drugs. Now, I raised her in Laguna Beach, where everybody goes down to the beach to have sex, smoke pot, have a few tabs of LSD now and then. So that's a pretty tough place to ask a child to stand up for these kind of values. But she knew there were some consequences to not choosing to live the way God has decided would really be best for you to live. Mm-hmm. So she graduated from high school. She had never touched a drop of alcohol, no drugs whatsoever. She was a virgin and had never had sex with a guy. And when she graduated, there were major cash prizes. There was a car, there was, I paid for school. And so she benefited from the choices. And the thing that I did by saying that is if anybody offers you a drink, you tell them, you know what, I've got a really strange father.
Blame the dad, blame the parents, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing. He, if I take that drink and he finds out, it's going to cost me somewhere around $150,000 to take that drink. Because he's not going to pay for college if I drink. He's not going to buy me a car. He's not going to get clothes for me. He's just not going to do the stuff that he says he'll do. And all I have to do to get that is to say no to you right now. Mm-hmm. And every time that came up, she would say, man, I would love to have that beer, or I would love to smoke that joint, but I have a weird dad. That joint is going to cost me about $150,000, and I just think it's too expensive for me to smoke. So that's one thing that a parent can do, is to clarify the values and not be confused about it, and uphold those values. Yeah, another thing that's really important is you have to look at the consumption of media. You cannot allow a child to be exposed to everything that they want to look at, that they're curious about, and expect them to be normal kids. And, Solomon, I have an 11-year-old, Solomon, he'll look at a 3-minute video of an elephant washing another elephant that's just hilarious for whatever reason. And then he's on to something else. And I say to him, look, you see how that programs your brain to experience things in 2- and 3-minute segments. And if you do that every day, when you go into a class for college and it lasts 45 minutes, you're not able to concentrate for 45 minutes because everything you've seen is in 2, 3, 4-minute snippets. And so he says, okay, Dad, I'm going to switch. It'll be all movies all the time. I go, no, that's you.
Long form.
If you let a child see everything that they want to see on the internet, it will be overwhelming to them. It will show them things that if they're exposed to them, naturally, they're going to feel anxious about them. So you want the values to be very clear. You also don't want to be confused about the consumption of media. You have to limit it. You have to put the age restrictions and time restrictions on it. And then the other thing is you need to have a sense of calmness and peace in the home and wherever you are, and to help the child develop a way that they can calm themselves down and comfort themselves so that they're not dependent on somebody else. And then lastly, I'll just mention, you need to help them. You need to cooperate with them. Not like, yeah, get out there and live your life, and when you mess up, I'm going to help you. No, let them know what to expect. If you take a child to the dentist, most likely you're going to say, well, he's going to want to look in your mouth. It's just kind of part of the deal. So that when the dentist says, I'd like to look in your mouth, the child isn't freaked out over that. So part of this is cooperating with them and preparing them ahead of time for stuff, and that lowers the anxiety. And then finally, the best thing you can do is to let them know you're there for them in a shameless way, that you're not going to put them down for needing help, or you're not going to put them down for being overwhelmed or crying or whatever. That you're a rock, and you're a rock that they can come to without fear. I think that's the most important thing of all in helping prevent these kind of problems, and to look out for things that cause them or exacerbate whatever little struggle your child's having. So there's my list.
That's a great list. 5 things, right?
Yeah.
Can we run through them one more time?
Yeah. So look out what they're consuming in media. You gotta control them. Be sure that they are very secure in their values. They're not confused about that. Be sure that you are raising them in calmness, and that they have the ability to calm themselves and soothe themselves. Cooperate with them and prepare them for things that they're not aware of, so that when it happens, they're not going to be caught off guard and anxious. And then above all else, be connected to them. And let them know that they can come to you no matter what. You're there for them no matter what. You have a connection and a bond that won't be broken by any misstep that they might make. That's
awesome.
Yeah.
So first off, I love that there's no faith in any of that. It's just like, hey, these are good principles. And that's great. That's really great.
Well, if your values aren't based on pretty conservative principles that you would find in a Bible, then you're probably not going to do too well at preparing your child from a standpoint of values that provide security and structure for them. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, that I didn't just jump out there with it. And people that, you raise your child and you think, well, I want them to be tolerant, and I want, or some buzzword like that. Hey, what you want is you want them to be wise. I want a wise kid. I'd like my child to, Solomon's on the golf team, and he's the worst golfer. But only one golfer on the golf team got an award this year, and it was him, because of the character that he shows when everybody else has hit the ball 150 yards, and he walks up to the tee and hits it 3 feet, waits his turn, and then whacks it, and sometimes it'll go 75 the second time and sometimes not. But I got to tell you, I'd rather him have the character award on the golf team than to be the longest driver on the golf team. So when you're preparing your child, you get the results, and you'll start to see the results. You don't have to wait till they're 35. They'll show up. And if you're not seeing that, then you need to be doing something about it. But those results don't come by being, setting out that my goal is to have a tolerant child. My child's wise, and he's tolerant, very tolerant and understanding of other people. But he doesn't compromise on his own values. And that alone, in addition that he's kind of brilliant, well, he's very brilliant, but that sets him apart from others, to the extent that a golf team guy has to give the guy an award at the end of the season because he handles disappointment so well.
That's great. So from the faith perspective here, how do the topics of anxiety and depression, how do we approach that from a faith perspective?
Well, if you inflict any amount of shame on a child for not being strong enough or not having enough faith to handle a situation, or they get involved in a situation where they're despairing and all that, well, then you've really not read the Bible very well, inflicting that kind of shame. It says Jesus was a man of sorrows, and he was acquainted with the bitterest of grief. So, sometimes a child needs to grieve some stuff, grieve the parents he doesn't have, or the situation he doesn't have, the things that somebody else. You help them work through the despair, just like Jesus wanted his disciples to help him through his despair. They didn't do it; they couldn't stay awake. It's a biblical principle that it's okay to be sad and depressed and full of grief. And by the same token, the father of the faith, Abraham, was a very anxious man. And, in his anxiety, he essentially prostituted his wife a couple of times out of fear and anxiety for himself. And it's just bizarre that's literally the father of our faith. But when you are able to point some things like this out, the mistakes, the fallibility of others, it allows a child to go out there and live kind of a scary life and a risk-filled life without thinking, that you're going to reject them if they don't succeed in every area. It's such a gift to them. And that's a biblical principle. And shaming does not work with our kids. And this whole thing of, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. There's just so many better ways to communicate with a child, which is, sharing your own disappointment, your own hopes for them, and how they've kind of missed that mark. That's much more of a godly perspective than inflicting shame upon them, thinking you're doing the right thing as a Christian parent.
Dr. Stephen, that's really insightful. So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that there is a spiritual component, whereas we derive our values from the Bible and our approaches, but there are also practical measures to be taken too. And we need both to be helping teenagers in this generation.
Yeah.
I want to
Let me just say one thing about that. I would say, it's kind of all spiritual, but you better be able to communicate it practically, or you're going to lose your child.
I think that's what we're seeing from all these interviews we're doing right here.
Yeah.
So like every discussion that we're having about all these big topics is spiritual, but we have to find the way to communicate it.
So communication is key. My question is, what do you do? On some level, every one of us needs help. That is just absolutely true.
Right.
What do you do, though, with the teenager? And the parent obviously sees that he or she needs help, but the teen just doesn't want help right now and is just kind of refusing or not listening. What do you do with the people who obviously need help, but just don't want it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, if you're living under my roof, eating my food and spending my money, you don't have options. You need help. So one of our boys, when he was 16, was just really missing the mark. I mean, really missing the mark. And so we got together and said, most people would just say, let's just see how this plays out, or is this a phase? He ought to wake up, that kind of thing. But I think that's really a big mistake. And so we didn't care whether or not he wanted to. We sent him to Utah in November, knowing that he would not be with us Thanksgiving or Christmas. And we sent him to a wilderness program in the middle of winter where you're outside the whole time. There's no indoor classroom or anything, where you have to learn to make fire and cook for yourself and all this stuff. We said that's what it's going to take to turn him around. So you don't let a child determine what they want to do or don't want to do. And in fact, if you're working with a really good therapist who works with teens, you take them to that therapist. It's the therapist's problem that they're resistant. And if they're any good, they're going to find a way to link with that child's heart. That's not your job. It's your job to get them there. And so you have to say to the child, look, we're going to do this. You're going to go by yourself once. We're going to go as a family once a week. If you don't like that, you can't live here anymore. And so the child says, okay, then I'm going to go live with Bucky and his family. And so he moves out to live with them. And it lasts 3 or 4 days because they don't want him. Once he's there a while, they realize that, hey, this kid's got problems. Send him back home. So
his parents.
and it's so much easier to do those kinds of things at 14 and 16 than it is at 18. And that's where parents really get in trouble. They think it's going to go away. Time heals all wounds, all this stuff. It's a phase. And then the kid turns 18, and then, the child they do have the authority to say, no, I'm not going to get help. Now, you have the authority not to support them. But most parents at that stage, they'll say things like, well, I can't just throw him out on the street. Okay, don't. Let him get picked up and spend time in jail, which is a whole other issue, because sometimes parents fight tooth and nail to keep their child out of jail, which is the one place they wouldn't be able to get drugs or kill themselves and be in a protected environment. And so the parents are misguided in doing everything they can to keep them out of jail. But that probably has nothing to do with your original question. So we'll get back to what you really wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I know that works well. There does need to be an element of where parents are responsible for their children's lives. My follow-up question to that, though, is how do you know, when does the parent know when they need counseling? Or when both of them need counseling? At what point is this just, this is my child's issue versus this is a family issue, or this is my issue? Do you have any wisdom for that? Does it help teens when parents go into counseling too?
Well, you're talking to a guy that, New Life, the organization that I run, we have 1,500 counselors around the country in our network that we refer people to. We have an 800 number. People call 1-800-NEW-LIFE. They go to a counselor or they go to one of our intensives on the weekend. But I'm a guy that, I go to see a counselor every week. So to me, that isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. And there are things that I can't see about myself, can't see in my situation, that a very wise person, an older man, helps me to see from a different perspective. So if you're having a difficult time with your teenager and you think you're competent to handle that on your own, I don't know. I just think that's really misguided. So you need to get some help to kind of go week to week in getting some advice on what's the latest on this situation based on what happened last week. Now what should I do? I can't imagine somebody not having that kind of help if your child's really in trouble. And then they'll integrate your child into that help, or they'll refer your child to somebody else. But, the way a child is in need of counseling themselves, of course, all the different indicators start to happen. The grades fall, or they stay down. They become totally disconnected to you and other folks. Things that they enjoyed doing, they don't do them anymore. Or they're starting to give away, like they play the guitar all the time. They give their guitar away. These are the kind of things, when you see it, you need to go get some help. And it might be from a therapist that says, I'm just going to work with the adolescent for a while, or we're going to work together as a family. But don't try to handle those situations alone when you see that things are not the same. Something has happened here, and we need to take some major steps.
Yeah, I hear that advice often, that when big issues like this sort of start to show their head, the parent does not need to handle it on their own. Like, get professional help. Step number one. Is that that's what you're saying? Just to reinforce that?
Absolutely. I mean, if your liver hurts, I guess you could try to figure it out yourself. I'd probably go see a doctor if I were you.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you so much, Stephen. If parents who have listened to this want to dig more into whether the topics of depression or anxiety and how to kind of parent through that, or whether it's sort of the counseling sphere, do you have any final advice or resources particularly that they could dive into for that?
Well, it's old advice. It's, sooner is always better than later, especially when it comes to dealing with teens. The older they get, the more difficult it is to intervene. Mm-hmm. Don't have a confrontation with your child before you have a conversation with them. Mm-hmm. Just talk to them. Third thing is, right now, evaluate your connection with them and do whatever you can do to strengthen that. Now, a couple of great resources. One, How We Love Our Kids by the Yurkoviches. Don't ask me to spell it, but it starts with Y-E-R. But How We Love Our Kids, great book. Parenting with Love and Logic, 2 great books. But you mentioned the Everyman series, and there are 4 books in the Everyman series. One is Preparing Your Daughter for Every Woman's Battle, and then Preparing Your Son for Every Man's Battle, and then Every Young Man's Battle and Every Young Woman's Battle. These are great books. It's great when the parent reads them first, and then they hand them to the child, and maybe they go over them together. Maybe the child reads on their own. They ask questions about it. But those are 4 great resources, or 5 great resources that you could use to essentially raise great kids.
That's great. And each one of them seems to build into that invest now sort of mentality, which is excellent. And good advice that, maybe people have heard before, but it's so good to keep hearing it again and again because we forget.
No, absolutely. We do. Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. It's been great to have you here. And we will hopefully talk to you later.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. And keep up the good work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.